I don't just want to teach you guys how to complete tactical tasks, but I want to teach you guys how to become thinkers. I want you guys to be able to determine for yourself based off what you're seeing or what you're being told, whether it is either more right or more wrong. I can't possibly go over every tactical situation that may exist, which is why if I can get you thinking about these things in the correct way, that is probably more important. I'm going to talk about two methods utilizing a whiteboard. Now, you don't necessarily need a whiteboard, but I'm a visual learner, and this is going to help me paint a pretty good picture for you guys. And if you're not going to actually use a whiteboard to do this, then you need to think of these things in terms as if you are actually using a whiteboard to demonstrate these things. Don't forget to feed the algorithm down below and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Also, you can follow the link in the description to my website to sign up for my email list for some tactical gear that might be coming out in 2026. I'm going to talk about two methods or two ideas. The first is determining on what you believe is right or wrong based off of what you're seeing rather than who you're seeing it from. And the second is when people utilize what I call in-theory ideas to explain why they believe that method is the better, safer, or more efficient way of doing something. And so if I have the one man and a two man getting ready to enter this room right here, this corner fed room, and the one man enters this room, he kind of first looks really hard to the left corner, and then he kind of proceeds down the wall that he's looking at, but then he drifts into the middle of the room and then shoots this target that is about here. 99% of people out there would say that this is incorrect. They would say that it's incorrect because, well, he didn't actually run a particular route, right? He didn't go to the known or to the unknown. He pushed into the middle of the room, which is a place that you don't want to be. And potentially in doing so, he cut off the number two guy's field of fire if they're actually scanning that room how they're supposed to be. Now, the reason that we don't want to enter the room like that or go to the middle of the room is because it could open you up to additional threat areas that aren't being covered. And so 99% of us looking at the whiteboard doing this would say that that is wrong. What would be the correct way of demonstrating this that most people would say, 99% of people would say is correct? Well, the one man, depending on which direction he goes, the number two man goes opposite. They collapse that room back down to each other. They're staying relatively close to the walls, and then they're focusing on the next threat area. 99% of people would say that that is correct. Now, it doesn't matter if we're showing you the wrong way of doing it, and we say that these are two patrol officers, or these are two SWAT guys, or these are two tier 1 operators, right? Because we're utilizing a whiteboard, so we don't have to imagine who it is. We're just focusing on what it is. And so, again, 99% of us, regardless of who it is, can say it's wrong. The reason that I'm not using 100% is because I just feel like we should have a little bit of wiggle room. Now, if we change from a whiteboard to, somebody on the catwalk with a camera looking down at who's doing this, and it's two patrol officers, we could say it's wrong. If it's two SWAT guys, we can say it's wrong. If it's two tier 1 operators, we can say it's wrong. Again, because we are not focused on who it is, but we are actually focused on what it is they are doing. And so if you ever see a video, like my previous video that I critiqued, which was apparently some special forces guys doing exactly that, it doesn't matter who they are, right? I don't look at these videos in terms of who it is, but I am focused instead on what it is they are showing us. Next, in theory ideas. I've gone over a number of different times on this channel what step center is. I'll link some of the videos where I already covered this in the description. But when we talk about step center versus dumping into the room, right? Step center, we're actually stepping in front of the threshold, squaring up our body armor, seeing the majority of the room, and then making entry after that. And then dumping into the room is just focusing initially on the hard corners, right? We're not checking the middle of the room, we're just going right and we're going left, right? Most people, I get a lot of comments where people say, yeah, obviously step center, who's even dumping into rooms anymore? Well, some of you guys don't know that there are still people out there who are an advocate for dumping into rooms, and they believe that stepping center is wrong. And so if that is your belief system, well, that is who I am challenging here in this scenario, utilizing a whiteboard and testing what I call an in-theory idea. You see, when you talk about step center, you can list the number of things or the benefits that you get from stepping center. When you step center, you're squaring up your body armor to where the potential threat is, right? And in doing so, well, we're not giving up the side of our body armor, which is the most vulnerable part of our body armor.
The enemy's guns are naturally drawn to where you're going to be entering that room. And as they came in, one went left, one went right, and they were both hit by the AK fire and about the side right there. One guy on one side, one guy on the other.
And if there is somebody in there and he starts shooting at us at the threshold, it's at least giving us an opportunity to see where the gunfire is coming from. Those are a number of the benefits. Then, by the time we enter the room, if we're not being shot at from the center of the room, then we can truly focus our attention on these hard corners when we do that. And so most people would agree, based off the list of, positives that come with stepping center, that we can actually demonstrate on a whiteboard that you receive from stepping center that this is a great idea. Well, those who talk about dumping into a room, and they only talk about it, right? And the reason that they only talk about it is because they give an in-theory explanation as to why it's better, safer, and more efficient. And what are the things that they say? Well, they say that dumping into the room is better, safer, more efficient because speed, surprise, and violence of action. They say dumping into the room is better, safer, more efficient because we are overwhelming the enemy inside the room, which, by the way, we know doesn't actually work. And so the question becomes, how can we utilize a whiteboard to test these in-theory ideas of violence of action? How do we utilize a whiteboard to test whether or not we are overwhelming the enemy or the bad guy inside the room? And the answer is, you actually have to remove all those positive things that you get from stepping center, and you have to just trust what the person is saying. Violence of action is an in-theory concept or idea because you can't demonstrate it even on a whiteboard. There's a reason why you haven't seen an individual who proposes dumping into the room is better, safer, more efficient than step center, get out a whiteboard, draw the two side by side, and stand in front of the camera and say, this is why I believe step center is more dangerous, right? This is what I believe you lose from step center. Because the reasons that they give for why dumping into the room is better, safer, more efficient is because they can only give you an in-theory concept that can't be demonstrated. And if you have somebody stand here and draw those two ideas up side by side and try to explain to any reasonable person, I assume most of you are reasonable people, what the positives and negatives are, 99% of people would say, yeah, dumping into the room actually looks like a really bad idea. After I already recorded this video, I exchanged emails with somebody, and part of that email exchange, the topic came up of in-theory concepts as I was explaining to him, because basically what he said in the email is that he took an active shooter course, and one of the things that he said is that they were big fans of dumping into rooms, which in an active shooter scenario, like they were training, speed was their best protection. The goal was to end the shooting as soon as possible. And in-theory concepts became the conversation, and I basically said I'm going to be coming out with a video this weekend to explain what I mean by this, but he sounds like he was basically given an in-theory concept or explanation as to why dumping into the room is better, safer, more efficient, which is speed is your best protection. It doesn't matter how fast you dump into a room. 1 and 2 man, if a guy's pointing a gun at the threshold, are going to get shot. You guys have seen in this video in particular and other videos what it looks like when people dump into rooms, and that's speed, surprise, and violence of action. And what he was not told, was this is why dumping into the room is better, and giving a list of examples and demonstrations, or even drawing it up on a whiteboard like I've done in this video. And certainly he wasn't given the alternative, which is, if you step center, and these are the benefits I've already gone over in this video. Instead, he was given, in my opinion, which is an in-theory concept, is speed is your best protection. There is something that we say is utilizing speed as cover, but we don't say that when you're dumping into a room. We say that when you're moving in the open or you have to traverse large areas, right? Why do we say that? Because hitting a sprinting target out in the open is much harder than hitting a target that is utilizing some cover or, staying still, basically, right? So speed as cover is something that we say, but we use that when maybe we're moving from a piece of cover towards the objective, right? So instead of moving slow where you're easier to be hit, you use speed as cover to move quickly to get to the objective. That is not the same when we talk about entering inside of a room. Like that that thing does not exist. So again, in my opinion, he was given a speed is your best protection as an in theory concept explanation for why they were doing what they were doing. And he says the goal was to end the shooting as soon as possible. 100%, that's the goal. One of the things that I'm going to make a longer video about when it comes to active shooter and that I explained to him is, let me guess, you took an active shooter class with a bunch of people you don't know, and you're never going to be with those people if you ever respond to an active shooter. And his answer was like, yeah, that's true. And I said, so they're teaching you how to do a room entry as 1, 2, 3, and 4 man with a group of people that just showed up to this course that they're never going to see again. But when you get out there on the street, that's not what you're going to have. If you are skilled enough and you understand the fundamentals of CQB, you understand angles, you understand angles of approach and angles of attack, and utilizing at least cover or concealment when and where it's practical. You understand when to move, when not to move. You understand, they say, moving to contact or moving direct to threat. You, as an individual, understand these things because you train these things. You have no idea what the person who is showing up with you knows or what their abilities are, right? And so you're actually training this active shooter scenario under the premise that you have people that are going to do this secondary job, right? That's just not reality. So even when you take these courses, like I explained in the one-man CQB video I did somewhat recently, is like when you take these courses, and actually these courses should be trained to law enforcement as if you're basically by yourself, right? And that means, right, like how is dumping into the room in an active shooter course that you're being trained with people you don't know, with people that aren't going to be there, relevant? And the answer is like, it's not, right? So if I dump into a room in an active shooter situation because they're saying dumping into the room is the best way of handling this problem, I might have some officer from some other agency, a school resource officer. I have no idea if he's coming in there with me, right? So there's no way that my first instinct when I get to a door where I think the shooter is, oh, let's go. I got at least number 2 guy with me who's going to get my back. That's not going to happen, right? So that's even more emphasis onto why, stepping center, even though this isn't a video about, necessarily tactics, is your best approach to these situations for the individual officer, and panning the entire threshold, right? Because you have no idea what that person behind you is going to do. You have no idea if you're going to be able to get set up cross coverage, or you enter that room and this person is going to collapse the room back down to within a meter of you. You're basically entering that room by yourself. And again, so this is just more emphasis on why these people that are teaching officers who are showing up to a class that don't train together, that don't work together, and certainly aren't going to respond together even if they work together or are on the same department, are teaching you to dump into rooms when that's not the reality that you're going to be faced with out on the street. So in order to get to the best information possible, you have to be able to do 2 things. You have to be able to look at what you're seeing and determine if it's right or wrong, absent of who you're seeing it from, and you have to be able to understand whether or not an individual or organization is telling you the better, safer, more efficient way of doing something is based off of an in-theory idea. And in order to do either of these 2 things, in order to analyze either of those 2 things, you can either actually utilize a whiteboard like I did here, or you could just imagine trying to explain these things on a whiteboard. If you haven't subscribed already, it would be cool if you were, and don't forget to feed the algorithm down below.